and sort of move on. And I took care of this industry and did, what I was supposed to do. I think he and the people around him that have brought this blockchain topic to his attention since somewhere around closing in on a year ago. I think they understand and grasp the potential there for our nation as a whole, for our economy, and what it means. And so he's seems to be fully engaged in actually making this the U.S. the home.
Welcome back to Only the Savvy. I'm Nicole, and today we're excited to welcome back Kristopher Klaich from Digital Chamber. Kristopher, it's great to have you here again. For those who may not know, Kristopher is a leading advocate for blockchain innovation and policy development. Thank you for joining us. To start,
Thanks, Nicole.
absolutely. To start, could you share any updates on your work at the Digital Chamber since we last spoke in January?
Sure, absolutely. Gosh, it's been a whirlwind of a month or so. I can't remember the exact day that we last spoke, but it's just been a constant stream, and something I've said to people, gosh, almost every time I run into friends and colleagues at different events and things around town, that it feels like since January 2nd, when the holiday ended, that things were surprisingly busy even on the second and third. I think it was a Thursday and Friday that week, and it has just accelerated over the last 2 months. Every day, every week, there's just more and more activity going on. So since we last spoke, gosh, I could barely know where to start. But even this past weekend, late Friday night, there was news that came out that President Trump was going to host a crypto summit. And so my phone my whole team and colleagues' phones were blowing up Friday night into the evening, wanting to know details about that and what was going to take place, what would be discussed, who would be invited to attend the summit at the White House, which is taking place this Friday, March 7th. Sunday, that was kind of going on all weekend, and then Sunday during the day, I was at church, and my phone was buzzing, 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 and I was trying not to look at my phone during church and be focused on the sermon and what was the service itself. And there were all sorts of emails when I got out about the President Trump's seemingly maybe a little bit off the cuff tweet about the crypto reserve, strategic reserve that he has been planning, and he named a handful of individual cryptos, and so that sent markets flying in general for those coins and those tokens and their ecosystem tokens. But there was, again, I say a little bit off the cuff from President Trump, because he didn't mention Bitcoin and Ethereum, which maybe he thought those were implicit, that they would of course be in there. But of course the advocates for those chains and owners of those chains were sort of up in arms and wanting to know why they weren't, and would they be why they weren't included, and would they be included. So that was all just over the weekend. And then Monday morning, this is just yesterday, news came out that a congressional crypto caucus is being kicked off, started by Representative Tom Emmer, and Richie Torres. So a Republican and a Democrat are starting this caucus. So for your listeners and viewers that might not be familiar with that concept, a caucus is a group. It's it's a formal group, but also loose in the sense that anybody can join it. But it's formal in the sense it has to be created through, I think, the Congressional Administration Office, some sort of obscure office for Congress. But it's basically a group of congressmen, senators can also join as well, that are uniting around a particular issue. And in this case, it's blockchain and crypto, with the purpose of preparing to mobilize a group of congressmen and senators to be able to vote in, hopefully in unison, around good legislation that the Congress will be developing over the coming months. So that was another piece of news that came out yesterday. And kind of rewinding a little bit further back over the last several weeks, it's really just been an onslaught of news. The SEC has announced almost daily cases that they have dropped that the SEC under the previous administration had brought against large players in the industry, and those have been being dismissed. Oh, like I said, almost every day. There's at least a half a dozen or so cases I know of offhand, and maybe more than that in aggregate. So just really exciting activity, really interesting activity. Some things unexpected and how quickly they're happening. Some things, anticipated and welcome now that there have been some formal announcements. Um, Especially, I would say this activity on the Hill coming up this week. Excuse me, not on the Hill, although there is activity on the Hill as well. There's some hearings going on as well around crypto and blockchain, but the activity at the White House, it's another, I would say, another sign that how serious and focused this administration is on these topics. They're not. I don't think that they're playing lip service to the industry. They're actually interested in moving forward with good policy, law, and regulation. And I know I've kind of been going on one topic or one question, and there are lots of different avenues that we can kind of snake off short on these. But another anecdote and something that's taken place over the last month, there's your viewers may be familiar with the crypto AI czar, who was named, I think, towards the end of last year, David Sachs. His executive director that is running and in charge of the advisory council at the White House is a gentleman named Bo Hines. He's new-ish to the industry. He's hit the ground running and absorbing everything that he can from industry players. So he's been very engaged and collaborative. We had a meeting with him at our offices maybe 2 weeks ago, I think it was now. So that again is another indication of just how engaged the White House is on these issues. He is on a daily basis in contact, I think, with people across the industry, learning about the industry himself for the things he does know of it, but gathering information, data across the industry. So large players, small players, medium-sized players in the industry. He wants to know what they're doing, what interests and needs they have, what some of the issues they are that they've been facing over the last several years. And one of the things that he was very clear about and emphasized a couple of times, which I was very encouraged by, was that President Trump wants to make monumental change in this area. He's not looking for sort of a check the box and sort of move on. And I took care of this industry and did what I was supposed to do. I think he and the people around him that have brought this blockchain topic to his attention since somewhere around closing in on a year ago, I think they understand and grasp the potential there for our nation as a whole, for our economy, and what it means, and so he's seems to be fully engaged in actually making this the U.S. the home of crypto, as he said, and really the leading innovating country.
Leading this, absolutely. Jumping into President Trump's executive order on digital assets has been a major development, aiming to create a unified federal framework. What impact do you think this will have on innovation and the industry as a whole?
Well, I think some people were, that was a highly anticipated executive order. Some people anticipated it being released the day that he moved into office, that he took office on January 20th. And I think if I recall, it didn't come out for maybe a week. I don't remember exactly when, but it took several days. And I think that was sort of indicative of the folks like Bo Hines that I just mentioned, just coming together and forming. These are new positions actually inside the White House. There's never been a crypto AI czar. There's never been an executive director for a crypto advisory council at the White House. So I think it was indicative of getting their feet underneath them and wanting to get this right and not just sort of move too quickly and put something out that wasn't useful. That said, the executive order itself it was very directional and not extremely prescriptive in what it asks for and requires. And so I think it was again an indicator more than providing extremely clear direction on what would what some agencies and would need to do. The major things that it went over and suggested were promoting dollar-backed stablecoins. Uh, um, it addressed CBDCs and prohibited them. It ensured fair access to banking services, which was an issue that your listeners may be familiar with, the debanking issue over the previous 4 years in the last administration. It's seemingly becoming clear and clear that that was a very real thing. It wasn't sort of a crying wolf type of a situation where the industry was just complaining. For instance, there seems to be real evidence that they were debanked and that it really materially affected many companies based here in the U.S. So that was another issue that it touched on, and it also touched on regulatory clarity and the need to have regulatory clarity across the industry. And so those things were the major points that it touched on. Now it sort of comes the harder part of trying to implement those things across policy, law, regulation through Congress, through some of the rulemaking in some of the regulatory agencies like the SEC and the CFTC, FinCEN, which is underneath Treasury. It's sort of a combined regulatory / law enforcement agency inside of Treasury. And so that work is ongoing. We've seen some of it, and the SEC sort of taking the reins off of some of the probably overbearing lawsuits that they had against many companies. And so we're seeing some of that happen. And then we're seeing the activity on the Hill and discussions between the Hill and the administration around the most important and kind of most urgent issues focused on stable coins and market structure.
Absolutely. So jumping into the clarity between the SEC and the CFTC, another key topic is the collaboration between them. So to define their roles in regulatory crypto assets, how do you see this shaping the future of the industry? And is their cooperation enough to provide the clarity to businesses and investors?
Well, that's in process again. I think that is happening now as we speak. The SEC is holding, I think they're calling it a working group this Friday also. It's this week. So there's been a lot of engagement. And that's something else I didn't mention at the outset, and you asked an update on what's taking place, and I apologize. There's been so much that's happened. We had a meeting with the SEC. This is several weeks ago now as well, maybe 4 weeks ago. I can't remember exactly the date, but I think we were their first meeting, crypto focused meeting was with the Digital Chamber and several of our members. So they also have been very engaged on hearing from the industry, what do we need to do? How do we need to do it? Wanting to be collaborative in their approach. And so that is also ongoing. Like I said, they have taken some concrete steps already, the SEC. The interplay between the CFTC and the SEC has been a key question for several years, that where their jurisdictions will sort of be delineated and codified for the blockchain and crypto industry has not yet been determined. It's in process. It's certainly under this new administration and the guidance from the administration. I think it's in some cases it's leaning now to provide more authority to the CFTC to regulate the crypto industry and really define more of the tokens in the industry as commodities rather than securities or some unknown third option or some sort of opaque understanding of what tokens are in general. And so that's a major issue for the industry that is being cleared up sort of as we speak, or at least addressed as we speak. That's a major part of what will be a solution for how the industry can operate. When that will sort of have very clear definitions is not, it's not clear also as well, but that's an ongoing kind of tug and push and pull between the agencies and industry, helping it to try to bring clarity about that and their suggestions, and then influence from Congress and also from the White House on that topic.
Absolutely. Jumping into another big concern right now is security. It's a huge concern in the crypto world, especially after some high profile cases with some bad actors. Recently, the Bybit hack by North Korea for $1.5 billion. What steps do you think the industry and regulators are taking or should take to protect users and rebuild trust moving forward?
Well, this issue is, well, first to say the instance that you mentioned, the $1.5 billion hack of Bybit, which was now maybe 12 days ago, something like that. That is the largest hack in blockchain crypto history. I think it also may be the largest single hack also. So we're not, we're talking about very significant numbers and value. In this case, the hackers were almost certainly a group called the Lazarus Group, which is the state arm, the state hacking, cyber kind of black hat arm of the North Korean government. And so they're a known threat. This is certainly not the first time that they've had a hack for a significant amount of money. Unfortunately, it won't be the last either. But to highlight how significant this particular instance is and the topic in general, North Korea derives an estimated half of its income and funding for its weapons of mass destruction program only via crypto program hacks. And so that in and of itself is obviously pretty alarming, and something that no administration, whether it's this one or a Democrat administration in 4 years or 8 years or 12 years, is going to kind of sit back and turn a blind eye towards, and we can't and we shouldn't. So it's a very significant topic, and that is not going to change. And so that's one sort of in the weeds, and for maybe some of your viewers and listeners are aware of this, and maybe some aren't. But when we talk about a hack of crypto or blockchain, it's not that the blockchain itself has been hacked. It's that the sort of Web 2 traditional techniques that hackers use to phish and social engineer and scam people are what lead to the hacks of blockchain related companies, and they steal the crypto, and then they're able to, in essence, launder that or sell that on different ways and techniques on chain to derive actual dollars or some other currency that they can use to fund whatever weapons programs or whatever the case may be. And so I think that's an important distinction to make for folks who are not may not be aware. That's sort of in the tactical weeds, and maybe more at the higher level, and the kind of fraud that we've seen. Thankfully, we haven't seen large cases of this recently, but cases like Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX and others like that are sort of more at the institutional level. Those instances obviously are not good. They've hurt a lot of people. So, and again, some of this and much of it is really, I use run-of-the-mill as a euphemism, because I know a lot of people were hurt and a lot of people lost money in that instance and several others like it. But it was run-in-the-mill, that it was in the sense that it was terrible oversight of these companies and run-of-the-mill corruption and fraud inside of these companies that led to the collapse of these companies. So again, it wasn't that it was blockchain in general, but or something particular about blockchain that allowed or enabled it, but it was terrible accountability inside of these companies and just sort of general fraud. So that's all I'll say, that there needs to be regulation. There needs to be requirements for these companies that in some ways are similar to Web 2 and traditional financial institutions, so that that can't happen. So we have uh, clarity and visibility into how these companies are operating, that are hosting millions of customers, that are custodying billions of dollars of assets of customers. So it's very important. And of course, very thankful that it hasn't, it had a negative effect on the industry, but it hasn't had more of a negative effect over time. People, I think, rightly so, people don't know much about the industry, who are kind of dipping their toes in the water, are probably certainly a little bit wary of things like that. But the crooksters follow money, and every new technology in every new sector, that's what happens. And so it shouldn't be a surprise or unexpected. And I'll give you one more statistic that is pretty interesting and really sets things in, at least into some broader context. I'm going to get the exact number incorrect on this, but if I recall, and I believe this statistic came out from a recent report at Chainalysis, one of the big investigations in forensics firms, blockchain analysis firms. I think it's around $45 billion were lost in hacks and scams last year in the crypto world, in the blockchain world, which is a huge number. And it obviously, we would like it to be zero. It'll never be zero in blockchain or in your bank that's down the street, whether it's one of the big banks or a small regional bank. That fraud and corruption never has, been at zero. It never will be at zero. So 45 billion sounds like a large number. It is. It still represents somewhere around less than 1% of activity on chain, of the total amount of activity. That number is debated, how the companies that come up with that number, the methodology, and what the total data set is. So it's less than 1%, a 0.5%, a 1/4%, 3/4%, something like that. But the UN has estimated that 2 to 5% of traditional finance and activity is fraudulent or corrupt, or illicit, I should say. So 2 to 5% of the traditional finance world amounts to 3 or 4 orders of magnitude more volume than the crypto world. So as bad as 45 billion is, it's in the trillions. It's like several $1 trillion on an annual basis that is the illicit financial transactions in the traditional finance world. So as much as we want to be, and we should be and need to be diligent and stamp out as much illicit negative activity as we can in the blockchain world, and especially for where there is disproportionate activity, for instance, like we just chatted about, going to North Korea and funding North Korean weapons programs. I think it's important to keep it in the broader context that it is a lot, but we don't shut down the entire banking system because there is fraud and corruption and illicit activity going on through transfers and money laundering from Mexican and other drug cartels based all around the world, all sorts of activity like that. So I think we are past the attempt and thought to kill the industry that seemed to be in existence over the last several years with some members of Congress and potentially even some parts of the prior administration. I think we're beyond that, where it's sort of in the sense that they wanted to kill the industry. And that seemed to be clear with some of the activity and some of the just the attitude in general, but also some of the legislation that was proposed. I think we're beyond that. But even if we are beyond that, I think it's important to keep that in context, that this is still a new industry. It's, Bitcoin's only a little over 16 years old now itself, and there will be fraudulent, illicit activity. We need to work together as an industry, private entities and public entities and partnerships and data exchange between them to help mitigate that. And there are some really interesting things going on that are working towards that and helping to mitigate some of the worst parts of the industry and hacks and things. But anyway, I think it's important to keep that in that proper context.
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to jump into transparency and privacy concerns. Blockchain's transparency often is praised, but it's also raising concerns. At Bitcoin's Nashville conference in 2024, Edward Snowden warned about the risk of blockchain's transparency being misused. What are your thoughts on balancing transparency and privacy? And are there any discussions right now that you're hearing on how this might affect monitoring activity on exchanges?
Yeah, that was an important talk that he gave last summer, in the privacy versus the needs of the public and government to have some of this information. That's a constant push and pull, a constant battle. I think it's one where the line, I think we've been over time, especially over the last maybe 30 or 40 years, that privacy, it's sort of like the frog in the frying pan, where we've been losing some of our privacy, little bits and pieces at a time, and most often I think probably voluntarily giving up some of our privacy for the convenience of using a credit card or using applications on the internet or on our phone, social media, and different things, and allowing, and sometimes it's surreptitious where you just sort of click through the consent for things because you're not going to read 10 pages or 30 pages of disclosures to understand what's really happening. And if you do want to use whatever the application is, or if you click no, then you don't have the opportunity to use that application. And so I think our privacy has been eroded incrementally over the last 40 years. And really a great example that kind of highlights that is when credit cards started to become much more ubiquitous and widely used. It's sort of the front end of that adoption curve. Many people were scared or loath to use them because they, in many cases, were concerned about their privacy, their financial transactions being recorded, their personal information that might have been contained or transferred in those transactions. But now, and fast forward, that was, I think, in the late 70s, early 80s, when credit cards were sort of being adopted. You fast forward 20 years from there, maybe a little more than 20 years from there, and using our credit cards on the internet when, the early 2000s, late 90s, that was sort of the Wild West in some sense, and people were scared and loath to do it. Now we do it pretty much every day. And so incrementally over time, we've given up our privacy for convenience and entertainment and different things. And so that's all to say to your question about this topic. Blockchains enable a lot of things. They're not fully private. There are companies that are working towards overlaying better privacy applications on blockchains and on transactions. There's always going to be a push and pull between, like I said, the need for there to be some transparency so that we can catch bad guys doing bad things, but also, and especially here in the United States of America, where we have the history that we do of sort of freedom and free speech and private property rights to want to be able to transact. And there are plenty of reasons why, I think legitimate reasons why you wouldn't want the government to know everything that you're doing, nor do they need to know that I gave you $5 for a candy bar or something like that. But there's also, we were talking about the other side of this equation where the government does need to know if you are, instead of $5, you're giving $50,000 to a bad guy, to a terrorist, to a drug dealer, yeah, to a foreign government that's working against the interests of the United States. And so there's obviously, we need to find a kind of a point in the middle that is workable, that protects some privacy. And there's some really interesting people working on this and interesting projects. One of them is called Zcash, and I have a good friend that works there in the industry. They do a lot of great work around privacy, and I think approaching it from a collaborative, constructive standpoint that recognizes the need for that there to be some privacy, but also the need for, to stamp out some of the illicit activity. There's another project, and a member of ours called Surfer Monkey that is developing what in essence is a permissioned mixer, and that probably sounds
Tornado
yeah.
Cash is what pops in my
Exactly.
head.
It's basically in essence something like Tornado Cash that allows regulators access to the data that they need if and when it's legally requested and obtained. Of course, you know, the legal the rule of law and sort of the legal rights, those are dependent on each individual country and jurisdiction. Where we have a strong rule of law here in the US, and we can build privacy protection into some of these technologies, whether it's the token itself or something like a mixer where you don't want the government necessarily to know that you, I don't know, gave $1,000 to your brother or sister or something. Like, why did they, why should anybody know that? Or you have some medical condition and you don't want it to be broadcast that you are treating some particular disease, and you send a payment to some clinic or something like that. And there's no reason for anybody to know that. You wouldn't want people discriminating against you because you have whatever, for example. So there are legitimate reasons to keep some information private, for sure. But then, like I said, there are reasons when you have, at least in our country in the U.S., we're blessed to have I always forget Winston Churchill's quote on this, but something to the effect that, like, democracy is sort of like the he's basically saying that it's the least bad of all the other alternatives. Like, it's not perfect, but it's the least bad, something to that effect, but much more eloquent than I just put it. But for all the issues that many people think that we have in the U.S. and our government has, we have a system that has checks and balances, and of course those can be skewed now and then, and but there are ways. We have three branches of government that can help check one another. So that's all I'll say, that for something like privacy, it's extremely important. We can have the federal government, law enforcement, request the access to information that they need, and that has to be approved by a judge, and then they can go and access information from this basically a permissioned mixer application. And so that's there are ways to bridge the kind of middle ground. I know that some people on the old school ethos for the OGs in the blockchain world will not like that and will never want to acquiesce. And there's always the opportunity for that power and ability to be abused, and that's certainly a legitimate and real concern. And people do abuse power and abuse their authority. Happens all the time, and whether it's government or private sector. But there's no perfect solution, that's for sure. There's no such thing as perfect here, and coming to the best conclusion, the best arrangement that allows people to use blockchains, allows consumers to be protected, allows innovation to thrive and companies to flourish, especially here in the U.S., where we can realize the economic gains and growth. That I think we need to find the best balance we can among those different variables.
Absolutely. So I want to shift this a little bit to meme coins. Meme coins have become a prominent trend with figures like Trump and even Milei creating their own coins. What do you think this signals for the industry, and are there any potential risk or regulatory implications we should be paying attention to because of this?
Yeah, I mean it's a section of the industry that's fraught, obviously, with scams and with lots of people losing money. A lot of things to be concerned with. Um, when heads of state are involved, that certainly takes it to a different and broader level. For you know, the SEC has come out just recently to say, to clarify that they don't view memes as securities, which I think is a positive affirmation. But that doesn't do anything to protect people that are purchasing them. And I guess I haven't really taken a poll. I'd be interested to know, and maybe this varies depending on how long you've been in the industry or might have been bought purchasing meme coins, but it's hard for me to imagine that most people think that they're getting a fair shot at making money with meme coins. I could certainly be wrong, but just knowing, if you have any idea of how the kind of price action on these, like the sort of massive swings,
Yeah,
it's hard to imagine that people think they're getting sort of like an investment. They're making an investment. It's much more of a gamble at
casino.
best. Yeah. So that said, there, I think governments and regulators and law enforcement ought to crack down on these purely fraudulent schemes that are purely intentionally created with a pump and dump and rug pull model as the basis. Yeah, I think that's at least in Vegas, generally what the odds are in your favor and against you at blackjack and things like that, and that's a regulated industry, very heavily and regulated. With the meme coins, most people don't know what's going on behind the scenes until after the fact, and so there are some very particular people that are working in this. I use the term working very loosely. It's certainly a euphemism. People that are creating these coins, and in some cases working directly with celebrities to create the coins and working in tandem to prepare them to pull the rug and to sell on and dump onto retail investors, retail gamblers. Um, and so I don't see how folks like that should be able to operate. I'll give you one distinction for whatever the negatives there might be around a head of state developing a meme coin and releasing one. At the very least, the Trump coin was very clear about the model and the tokenomics of the token, and when it was released, I think on January 17th,
Yeah, yeah, very close.
10% of it was allotted to market makers that would just help trading activity take place on markets, which is you have to have that in any market, whether it's a crypto token or it's a stock on Robinhood or some other platform. You have to have market makers that facilitate the trading. There has to be a buyer on the other side of a sale, and vice versa at some given price point, and they facilitate that. And then 10% was allotted to be purchased by retail investors. The other 80% was very clearly stated it was owned or held by Trump related entities, and that it would be released over time beginning 3 months from that January 17th in tranches for over 3 years. So the headlines that came out after that Trump made whatever $1 billion on within a few hours, technically it's false. In some sense it's true, but he didn't cash out. Had no ability to, and still doesn't. He or none of his affiliates or family members or whoever owns those tokens or controls them, they don't have the ability to cash out until what is that, April 17th, I guess that would be.
3 months or 4 months.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then again in tranches in some 3 month increments or something like that over 3 years. The rest of it will be sort of unlocked and allowed to float into the market. So again, whatever you think of the idea of Trump or any other head of state entering into the meme world, at least they were very transparent about it. They haven't dumped onto retailers. They haven't pulled the rug and sold it at the top and watched the token
Yeah.
crash 95, 99%.
Like most of these coins that we've been
Yes,
seeing happening extremely quick.
exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's what took place, unfortunately, with the Argentinian.
Millet, yes.
Yes, with President with Milei. So, um, and the person that created the token was a known. That's his background. That's what he does. Whether the president of Argentina knew what he was getting into, whether somebody that worked for him, whether he was sold some other kind of a told it would be working some other way. I have no idea about that. But the person that he worked with, from the accounts and that I've read, it was clear that that's what this person does. So I think it's most people lump all crypto activity into one bucket. Um, for all the activity and knowledge and the import it has maybe for our lives and our work, it's still sort of a very opaque, not well understood industry, and certainly not well understood technology by, I don't know, 98% of the world. There's maybe way more than that actually. And so they lump this activity together, and it gives a bad reputation to the legitimate projects that are creating real businesses and real use cases using blockchain technology. So that's really unfortunate. I think that now, as policy and regulation is front of mind in this administration and in Congress, that will begin to be differentiated more clearly in the public eye, and that the SEC activity that I mentioned that just happened, I think it was last week, maybe the middle of last week, that saying that we don't view meme coins as securities. Those differentiations, I think, will serve to uh, differentiate for the public the difference between Bitcoin, for example, and some other meme coin. And there are thousands, maybe it was tens or hundreds of thousands of these tokens being created a day on Solana because it became so easy and cheap to do that. So, getting back to your part of your question, I think that there's a chance we may have sort of hit peak meme coin. I don't think they'll ever probably go away completely, but some of that frenzy may have had its meme coin season. I don't think it'll ever be over because there'll always be incentive for people to gamble, and when some public
Yeah,
event
figures with no
happens, yeah,
idea.
and yes, all sorts of enterprising folks will spin up a meme around whatever the topic is and see if they can make. There's always an incentive to make a quick buck, and people to try to jump on the train to make their own quick buck on top of that. So I don't think that'll go away, but hopefully. Hopefully it's becoming more of a known quantity in the sense that, like, I don't think we're going to see other heads of state throw their hat in the meme coin ring, and certainly not with what seems to be to me to be just a flat out criminal. This person that has authored basically many of these token drops.
So I want to shift into something a little bit better now. Stablecoins. Stablecoins continue to play a growing role in the financial system, and it's probably the one topic that's continuously being spoken about in the industry right now. How do you see stablecoins fitting into the US economy, and do you believe they could strengthen the dollar's position as the global reserve currency?
Yeah, stables, very interesting. It's sort of the first killer application of blockchain in a sense. The dollar value of stable coin tokens is growing massively, especially most recently for Circle, which is an interesting kind of change in what's taken place. That another company called Tether had been or still is the dominant stablecoin globally, but Circle is beginning to catch up a little bit, which has been interesting and I think encouraging in some ways. Um, yeah, to answer your question, yes, I think stablecoins will play and already are playing a very strong role in helping the dollar to maintain its dominance in world trade. Over 99% of activity on chain is denominated in dollar stablecoin activity. So that is an advantage that we've been gifted in a sense. I mean, that even dominates world trade activity. The dollar accounts for, I think it's around 60, somewhere in the 60s percent of trade settlement globally. I could be wrong about that, but it's somewhere around there, and maybe something similar for world reserve currency. Like the euro is used in some cases, and the British pound, and even the Chinese yuan is, and so that's an advantage that doesn't have to remain that way if other currencies become more liquid on chain, and so it's something that we should, I think, encourage. The more demand there is for dollars and dollar-backed stablecoin, the stronger our currency is in general. We have a unique position in the world to have the world reserve currency, and it doesn't have to remain like that. And for all the hand wringing and sort of alarm bells being raised from everyday folks, from folks on the Hill, I don't. The technical use of the dollar as the world reserve currency, I don't think we're in danger of losing that status anytime in the next 5 years, 10 years, probably 20 years. That it would take so much change and structurally and otherwise for that to be the case, that it's just there's no other currency right now that has the depth of use and the depth of capital markets that the dollar has. No currency, not the Chinese currency, the British currency, the European Union. So, but that's all to say that even a marginal loss of use of the dollar in trade execution around the globe could have massive effects back in the U.S., massive inflationary effects. And so the encourage and the continued growth of use of the dollar in other in this new world really on chain, where that all value and transactions will be at some point digital and recorded on chain. We want that to remain the case as much as we're able to influence that to be the case. Because like I said, I'd be interested if anybody knows of a study or has done a study on this, but a very, like I said, a very small change in the use of and holding of dollars as a reserve and for foreign reserves that other central banks have, or just in transactions, that will result in dollars flowing back into the U.S. when other countries sell the dollars that they're holding or don't use it as much in trade. That dollars flow back into the U.S. in essence, and so that will create inflation in the U.S. That scares me. I don't think most people probably don't understand that or appreciate that dynamic and how much effect it could have here. Yeah, there are a lot of dynamics that kind of wrap up into that, and whether a country would want to, another country would want to sort of influence that and try to push inflation into the U.S. We have adversarial nations that are vying to, become more predominant in their regions and globally, and so there's some incentive, and no action happens in a vacuum. Any action by another country will have its own consequences for itself and for its trading partners as well. So it's not like if other countries attempt to do that purposely, it certainly will have their own consequences. But it's something I think that we need to be aware of, and it won't take much to have an outsized effect on everyday citizens here. And maybe your listeners and watchers are familiar with this, but inflation kills and hurts the most vulnerable, the people least able to deal with it. And so if you are living month to month in essence, and you at the end of the month you only have $100 or $1,000 to put away, to buy a home or buy a car or put towards your children's educations. If inflation eats into $500 of that and you only have 500 left, like if prices go up 10% or 20%, it kills people who have no margin of error and no cushion. For the middle class or the upper middle class, and certainly for the most wealthy, paying an extra 10% has in essence no effect on their life, their lifestyle, what they can do, their outlook. But for the people that that if you're breaking even almost, and then everything costs 10% more in the course of a year, or in some nations, we Argentina was one of them, and there's many others, Zimbabwe and others, that Egypt, that have massive inflation. It just destroys people's livelihoods and their any
Yeah,
wealth
it's
that
done.
they've saved.
Done. Absolutely. It's absolutely horrible.
Yeah, it's stealing from and the people least able to deal with that.
Absolutely. Finally, what exciting you the most right now about the future of blockchain and crypto? I mean, we're hearing tons of trends right now emerging about this technology, and big players like JP Morgan, BlackRock, Fidelity are all starting considering this technology a lot different than what they viewed years ago. So, what are you looking ahead into the next chapter of this industry?
Gosh, maybe a few of the most interesting things that you touched on, one there, just the institutional use and adoption from the aspect of some of these large banks and institutions that are purchasing crypto. Right now, it's mostly Bitcoin. There's certainly some Ethereum, but there are other ETFs that are in the works of being approved. Solana being one of them, that it sounds like it'll be approved later this year. I think Solana futures are going to be approved soon, and that's sort of the precursor to a full ETF being approved, which, like I said, will probably happen in, I think, in Q3. So that's interesting and exciting to see the institutional demand, and institutional demand that is derived from big players, whether it's pension funds, um, large family offices that want to invest in Bitcoin and other cryptos, and they can do it through ETFs. And so that's really interesting. Even there are several college and university endowments that have purchased Bitcoin for several years, some of the Ivy League schools and others. There's also a small startup, in essence, school called the University of Austin, Texas, not the University of Texas, Austin, but it's a new school called, just had their first cohort begin in September last year, University of Austin, Texas. Really interesting model. If your listeners and subscribers haven't heard of it, it's worth checking out. We could do a whole podcast on that as well. And I could, introduce you to folks there. Would love to talk about it. Anyway, that's all I'll say, that they've purchased Bitcoin a significant amount in their endowment. So that's really interesting to see that there's institutional adoption also across some large institutions, even like JP Morgan, that are starting to build blockchain applications with their own internal use of a private blockchain. And so I think, being more and more recognized and understood that blockchain has the opportunity, the ability to make internal operations much more efficient, supply chains more efficient, things like that. So it's been a slow road to have that that adoption and that understanding that this technology can have real consequences and real improvements for companies and even for governments. That's interesting, exciting. Another one is decentralized physical infrastructure. Very succinctly, it's basically, you can think of the AWS, Amazon model. They have server farms all over the country, all over the world, and companies like Meta, for example, or other large Google, they rely on AWS servers and other companies, but AWS is the big one. If AWS goes down, their cloud servers go down, you can't access Facebook, you can't access Instagram, whatever the application is that for these huge companies. When you have a decentralized, and then you have like a single player that's sort of in charge of pricing and supply and demand, and building out these farms. There are models, there are companies, and one of them I think is called Akash, AKASH, that are building, for example, a decentralized network of compute power. And so most of our computers, the one that we're using to conduct this interview, it lies dormant, say 2/3 of the day, basically, more or less. And so there's a lot of latent computing power that's just sitting in everybody's homes. It doesn't seem like much, and it isn't on an individual basis, but if you have millions or potentially tens of millions or hundreds of millions of computers that are giving up their latent computing power when it's not being used by you or me, that is a significant source of compute power. And so there are decentralized networks that, in essence, aggregate all that power and allow it to be used for applications, whether it's LLMs, large language models, and training AI and things like that. And so that's a really interesting application. And there are other applications and instances of decentralized physical infrastructure. Another one is, in essence, decentralized mapping. So instead of Apple or Google Maps, there's a decentralized network that incentivizes people to put cameras in their cars, operate as a node, gather mapping data that's fed back to a centralized or a central mapping function that people can access, and that's updated in real time as these cars are going about cities and other places. So that's really interesting, and I think has a lot of broad use case where you can't. The other thing about a decentralized network is you can't take it down. So a large node on AWS goes down, and that degrades or destroys part of the network. In some cases, it could take a network entirely offline for a period of time. But in a decentralized network, if you remove a node, there are hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of other nodes that just pick up and continue on, in essence. And so it's a really powerful model that blockchain allows. And the last thing, and I know we can't get into all the details, but decentralized use of AI and the interaction between AI and blockchain is just sort of getting kicked off. And you could do, again, like a whole podcast probably around that as well. But
Yeah, that's going to be exciting.
yeah, and I think we've seen some really interesting activity already around that, where a bot, basically a AI bot that somebody created, has done, executed real world activity like buying a pizza and executing activity online, been programmed to start up a meme coin and sort of market and advertise it, and paid another AI bot to help advertise it. In one instance, this AI bot has created music, then created NFTs based around the music, sold those, gained some money, spun up an Ethereum validator so they could have a steady ongoing income to use to fund its activity, to pump and market its music and NFTs around its music. So really interesting, but it also has some profound and right now sort of unknown consequences. And again, I'll leave one more example that's maybe the scarier side of this. There was an instance recently where a bot, an AI bot, threatened, and I'm forgetting some of the details, and we'd have to look it up, but basically threatened to kill the creator of the bot. And when the creator asked the AI agent, like, basically, why did you say that? What's inspiring that? The AI gave some kind of an error code and said, I'm unable to answer that, and then shut itself down.
That's scary.
So yeah, so it's kind of like we've heard, like a lot of AI, they're black boxes. We don't know exactly how they're coming up with the answers or the data that they're feeding back to us. And you can imagine that all sorts of nefarious plots and outcomes from this if an AI is created to be a bad actor, and even if it's not created to be a bad actor, if it sort of just breaks bad, and you could imagine scenarios where they're interacting with real world applications. It's purchasing
Our water
some kind of
system.
like
Yeah,
a deadly agent, and it sends to somebody's house, something like that. I mean, sounds fantastic, sounds kind of crazy, but these things are all going to be possible very, very soon.
absolutely. No, it's unreal how fast technology is growing. Blockchain, AI, it's unbelievable. But Kristopher, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. Before we go, for everyone who is interested in learning more about you, can you provide some details where they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I didn't give like a little introduction. I forgot at the beginning, but I work for the Digital Chamber, like you said. We're the first and largest trade association for the industry. You can find me on LinkedIn. I run the Chamber's national security policy work, as well as right now our Bitcoin and energy work as well. Um, you can find me at on Twitter at Chris Klaich. It's Chris with a K, KriskLaich. You can look me up on LinkedIn as well. Like look for Kristopher Klaich on LinkedIn. I'd love to connect with your fans and your subscribers if they have questions or want to connect about things. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks.
Absolutely. And we'll be linking those links in the description of this video. So anyone interested in wanting to learn more, just click all the way down and you'll find out more information. To our audience, if you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. And as always, stay curious, stay informed, and stay savvy. Until next time, we'll see you. Bye.
SIM swap fraud is sweeping the globe, and your mobile security is at risk. Switch to Efani and lock out SIM swap fraud and get the most elite mobile protection in the world. Efani guarantees 100% protection from SIM swaps backed by a $5 million insurance policy. Stay secure with reliable coverage, free international roaming, and unlimited data. Trust Efani to keep your communications and assets secure. Get military-grade protection, 24/7 concierge service, and a hassle-free upgrade. Click the link below for $150 off. Thanks for watching. Help support this channel and receive exclusive offers from one of our partners located in the description. We'll see you on the next one.